In previous lessons of this module, we have seen features, capabilities, and technologies coming with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint solution. Now that we know that, it is right time that in this video we take a look and explain Microsoft Defender for Endpoint architecture. Since we already covered how each component works and what technologies provide features and capabilities, we should by now be familiar with most of the things that are about to be mentioned. But architecture will explain how all of these different components work together to provide all-rounded Defender for Endpoint solution. So we have Defender for Antivirus, that is built-in antivirus solution in Windows operating system that works in coexistence with Defender for Endpoint. And Defender for Endpoint is service that you purchase from Microsoft when you take appropriate license subscription. And that service provides next-generation protection, detection and response capabilities on top of Defender for Antivirus capabilities for your endpoint machines. These two are main components of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint solution. Having that in mind, crucial parts that build Microsoft Defender for Endpoint architecture are its portal, sensors, and tenant. Let's see how. So every customer, to say organization, gets their own isolated cloud instance, so-called tenant, after they purchase appropriate license subscription from Microsoft. And authentication to that isolated cloud instance called tenant goes through Azure Active Directory authentication. On top of that cloud instance is, let's say, management interface called Defender for Endpoint Administration Portal. That is a place where you land when you authenticate to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint cloud instance using your Azure Active Directory authentication. And we will use Portal to access Defender for Endpoint data collected by endpoint machine sensors, and to interact with that endpoint machines. As we already know, endpoint sensors collect data from endpoint, and if endpoint machine is onboarded to tenant and cloud delivered protection is enabled, this data is sent to cloud in tenant where machine is onboarded. Within each tenant are present and available advanced algorithms for detecting anomalies, machine learning models which process data collected on machines by sensors, big data capabilities, and other. Besides this machine learning and similar models for detecting and recognizing threats, an administration portal recognizing threats and administration portal as interface, some other components are part of your tenant's architecture as well. We have so-called denotation chamber, which acts as sandbox environment and is used for deep file analysis. There you can upload a suspicious files to receive a report about it. That is excellent and safe capability to investigate potential threats. Tenants also have automated investigation and response capability, so-called AIR. And we can put it under architecture component since automated investigation and response is something that automatically starts investigations to find threats on endpoint machines by using various inspection algorithms, and if there are any, automated remediation is done, which means stopping service, removing scheduled tasks, blocking URLs, or even sending files to quarantine or isolating a device. Another part of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint architecture is its large set of APIs that can be used, for example, to integrate Defender for Endpoint with already existing infrastructures. Going from beginning, you have endpoints and you have endpoint solutions to manage these endpoints. So first, your endpoint machines have Defender for Endpoint agents that are built in latest Windows operating systems, so-called Defender for Antivirus. There are also other operating system versions and platforms that don't have built-in agents, and on that devices you first need to deploy agent using appropriate endpoint management solution. For example, Group Policy for Windows devices, Jamf for Mac OS, Ansible and Puppet for Linux devices, and Microsoft Endpoint Manager for iOS and Android mobile devices. After you ensure that your endpoint machines have installed Microsoft Defender agent, you have to onboard that machines to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint in order for that machines to be able to send collected diagnostic data to cloud. Therefore, when onboarding endpoint devices, you may have to do slight changes in your organization, on-premises network architecture. More precisely, its outbound internet connectivity and firewall port opening to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Now, after onboarding devices to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, that endpoint devices are now able to provide their telemetry to your cloud instance of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint solution. In other words, to your tenant. And as we told, Defender for Endpoint administration portal is interface through which you can access that cloud instance. In a real environment, you will have a lot of endpoint devices, and each device has a lot of all kinds of data which will be collected by sensors and sent to your cloud instance. Not all of that data. To be precise, most of that data will not be data relevant to show insights to potential threats. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint backend services, which are already mentioned, machine learning, big data, and else, will translate that collected data from endpoint devices into usable insights, detections, alerts, and recommendations on which you can respond and react using various features we already showed and are available within Microsoft Defender for Endpoint administration portal. When we speak about Microsoft Defender for Endpoint architecture in your organization, there are 6 components, or we can say 6 parts of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint architecture we need to take in consideration when we deploy Microsoft Defender for Endpoint in organization. And Microsoft recommends certain priority of these components deployment because that will give systematic and adaptable approach because some capabilities are more critical to implement than the others. And some capabilities will never be needed to be implemented in your organization because the certain features are covered by some other endpoint solutions in your organization. That is the reality. And because of that, Microsoft has so-called Service Adoption Order for Defender for Endpoint solution. Also, it is recommended to slowly transition endpoints to another solution. In that Service Adoption Order, endpoint detection and response, so-called EDR, should be priority and first component to implement, and EDR capability is already achieved after you onboard device to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Because after you onboard devices, you can start using EDR capabilities. It is obviously that EDR is first in Service Adoption Order since it provides rapid detection and real-time response to threats, and therefore it should have highest priority. Second in Service Adoption Order is Threat and Vulnerability Management, which gives you insights to current state of your endpoint devices and insights to vulnerabilities and misconfigurations in your security posture. Rank 3 in adoption order goes to next generation protection, which other than else connects endpoint machine and its Defender antivirus capabilities with cloud and machine learning, big data, and other powerful capabilities. Rank 4 in adoption order is attack surface reduction with its various features to lower your environment's exposure space. Rank 5 on adoption order is automatic investigation and remediation, so-called AIR, that will reduce number of volume of alerts that you need to investigate manually. And on the last and 6th place of service adoption order, we have Microsoft Threat Experts. If you think about it and compare, you will conclude that this order really is logical, because real-time detection and response should have priority compared to reducing spots that need to be investigated manually. In later sections, we will see how and why we need to identify organizational architecture, but that is something we could also mention here in architecture part. So we can have cloud-native architecture, CO management architecture, on-premises architecture, and script and evaluation architecture. Cloud-native architecture is suitable for organizations without on-premises configuration management solution. CO management solution is suitable for organizations with both on-premises and cloud-based workloads. On-premises architecture is suitable for organizations that stick to on-premise tools like Configuration Manager. And script and evaluation architecture is suitable for small organizations without real endpoint device management infrastructure. We will talk about that later when identifying organization architecture, but for now it is enough to know that these architectures exist and are depending on organization needs. And that's it for this lesson. In next and last video of second module, we will summarize everything we have learned in Module 2.